Dr. Losik is the President and Chief Technical Officer of Failure Analysis and an award-winning spacecraft designer, winning awards from Boeing and the United States Air Force for his technical contributions and leadership. Dr. Losik has over 30 years experience in the design, manufacture, and test of military, NASA, and commercial satellites, ground stations, missiles, and launch vehicles as a digital design engineer, system engineer, engineering manager, and director at companies such as Boeing, Lockheed Martin, British Aerospace, United Technologies, L'Oreal, and L3 Communications. Dr. Losik pioneered the use of predictive algorithms to measure satellite and launch vehicle equipment remaining usable life beginning in 1980. Dr. Losik continues to use predictive algorithms successfully on NASA, military and commercial satellites, missiles, and launch vehicles to predict spacecraft equipment failures. Dr. Losik published the results of his research in 2 books and over 25 technical papers at a wide variety of technical conferences. Please welcome Dr. Losik.
Thank you. The title of my presentation is Using the Brain's Fight-or-Flight Response to Predict Mental Illness on Manned Spaceflight Programs, Increasing Astronaut Safety. This whole presentation is about increasing astronaut safety. And for me, PHM is about increasing astronaut safety, and that's primarily what I focus on. I got involved with mental illness when I took position at the University of California at Berkeley. I was immersed in the downtown area in which a large population of mentally ill people live. And it was literally immersed in them. They surrounded our facility there, and it was on the NASA IEEE program. And so at the same time, I happened to be an extreme athlete. I was studying martial arts. I was earning 3 different black belts simultaneously. I was an extreme bodybuilder, lifting over 40,000 pounds a session, teaching martial arts lifting as well as a long-distance runner, a 10K runner. And part of that, in order to continue to exercise at that level, you're continually problem solving. You're always trying to figure out how to work around whatever injuries that you have. And as a consequence of that, I was able to study and publish books on meditation, on Eastern thought, trying to figure out how my body operated, becoming sensitive to it, to its messages and things. And so that's sort of what got me the combination of being submerged with a group of mentally ill people, and the fact that I had to become extremely self-aware of my own internal workings of my own body, helped me to understand the source of mental illness and as well as how to prevent it and cure it. And so what my goal is to use the same predictive algorithm that I used in PHM to measure the usable life on spacecraft and launch vehicle equipment, to illustrate the presence of accelerated aging, to identify accelerated aging that occurs in the brain that is partly responsible for mental illness. So my paper will define the cause, the prevention, and the cure for mental illness during deep space missions. And what I'm about to say in this presentation, you will now read about in the literature regarding mental illness. Earlier today on the paper where they were talking about, the presenter was talking about epilepsy. She described epilepsy as a mental disorder. All mental illnesses are described as a mental disorder. That does not say what caused mental illness. So what I'm interested in is understanding the cause and how to prevent it and how to cure it. Currently, all money spent in all states in the United States, all funding for mental health illness is spent on the medications that's used to reduce the symptoms of mental illness. There's not one drug that's sold that actually improves or helps to cure mental illness. It's all about treating the symptom and minimizing the impact of the symptoms on a person's life so that they can continue at work or continue on the job or in marriage and continue life pretty much as is without making any lifestyle changes. And so, as a consequence of that, there's very, very little research done on the cause or the cure of mental illness. And so what you're going to hear today is, in fact, on my paper, is far more information with regards to what causes mental illness and what cures it. And so, back to the manned space program, NASA has reported that astronauts have suffered mental illness in low Earth orbit. And primarily they've reported anxiety disorders and depression. And so, this is in low Earth orbit. So for deep space missions, we can expect much more severe mental illnesses to occur. Major depression, bipolar disorder, as well as schizophrenia are really the worst of the worst. And so what my hope is that I will be able to explain how using predictive algorithms in the PHM program will be able to do those things for the space mission. According to the Journal of American Medical Association, today about 50% of all people in the United States is expected to acquire some form of mental illness in their lifetime, with an expected lifetime of about 82 or 83 years. And that rate is increasing. So as we get older, we can expect more. And that's the mental illness requiring some form of medication, antidepressants, anti-anxiety medication, that kind of thing. And so the rate at which people are acquiring mental illness is growing drastically. So, as I mentioned earlier, after acquiring mental illness, today's treatment simply addresses the symptoms. That's all. There's absolutely nothing done that tries to help people cure their mental illness. And so what happens is the symptoms require more drugs over time with higher doses, and as I mentioned before, no drugs actually stop the progression or reverse the severity of mental illness. And the pharmaceutical companies are probably one of the wealthiest industries in the world, the pharmaceuticals. And that is because they sell drugs for virtually lifetime treatment. There's less money to make a drug that actually cures mental illness than if you made a drug that's required to be taken for a lifetime. And so we have to look at academia in order to find the causes and cures. We can't assume that industry is going to do it because there's a conflict of interest there. They make a lot more money treating the symptoms of mental illness than they do curing. And so looking at the brain and the body, what I want to do is I want to correlate how we treat the medical conditions of the body and injuries as how we treat the brain. The body has what we call an endoskeleton, where the brain is wrapped around a skull that has a skeleton. And so the body, when we injure the body, exercising or doing whatever, it's very clear to us what we've injured. We're able to know when we overdo something, when we can strain ourselves. It's an indication that we've overdone it. And so we have lots of sensors in our body, our nervous system, all that goes to the brain that tells us we've injured our body. Now, all that data goes into the brain, into the primitive part of the brain. All of our sensory data goes directly into the primitive part of the brain. And then the primitive part of the brain actually decides how much data to send up to the conscious mind to create our reality. So 100% of all of our sensory data, our eyes, our ears, the sense of the skin, our nervous system, all goes into the primitive part of the body, the brain, excuse me. And if you want to quantify in engineering terms, it might be gigabytes, it might be terabytes of data, of analog data, continuous data. And then the primitive part of the brain actually decides what information to send up to the conscious mind to create our reality. And so, being in an enclosed case, nature, evolution had to decide how does the brain, when it's got a problem, how does it get fixed? We can fix the body, the physical body, very much by a multitude of ways. But the brain had to develop different ways in which to communicate the fact that there's a problem with it. Now, these are some of the things that we've done to improve. These are examples of how we've been able to improve what we can do to our physical body. Okay, so 1950, what Mr. Universe looked like as compared to what we can do today with training in chemistry. And so, the same type of development in our brain has not been done. There's a couple of reasons for that. But back about 200 or 300 years ago, the church got involved with the treatment of mental disorders because one of the famous scientists at the time, his name was Rene Descartes, he decided that a person's soul resided in our pituitary gland. And the church loved that idea. And so the church decided that doctors, they could treat the body, but the church was going to treat the brain. That's the head. Because again, if the person's soul was in the pituitary gland, that was the domain of the church. But as a consequence, they ordered all physicians not to treat the brain. So the medical profession developed treating the body, but fairly ignoring the brain. And it's only been recently, probably within the last 5 years, that doctors who treat, the psychiatrists that treat mental disorders, actually get paid the same as if as a physician that treats you for a broken leg or a broken arm. They've had a stigma associated with it for the last 200 or 300 years, again, because of what happened when the church decided to take over the responsibility of mental illness. So, what I call the fight or flight response, I think we all know what that is. It was developed by the brain in order to preserve our safety. And it works at a very, very fast rate, probably in the microsecond time period, whereas our conscious mind tends to work in the several hundred millisecond range. The subconscious can work in a few milliseconds, much quicker, much faster to respond. And it was developed to eliminate threats to a person by either running away or simply remaining in the fight. And that's why we call it simply the fight or flight response. It is the most powerful response in the brain. When the fight or flight response, which is part of the subconscious, I can't tell, I don't know the difference between the subconscious, where the subconscious begins and ends, and where the fight or flight response begins and ends. So I kind of lump them together. But it can influence all areas of brain and body at any time that it decides it needs to. 100% of the time, whether we're awake or asleep. And so it is the most powerful part of the brain. And so what it does is it can literally respond instantaneously, and it's remember collecting continuous or analog data, and all that's done to preserve our safety. It can override all conscious activities of the body, all subconscious activities. It can turn off our breathing if it wants to, if it decides it's necessary. It can shut down our heart. It can do anything that it decides is necessary for our survival. And so when it's activated, it releases two chemicals, one called cortisol and the other one called adrenaline. And it literally, those two chemicals are released, and as they spread throughout the body, there's an avalanche of literally thousands of other chemicals that get created in response to those. And that helps to ensure our safety. Our body can do almost anything practically in order to preserve our safety. Well, cortisol and adrenaline, they also both have to be extremely toxic to the body. And the fight or flight response was designed, it was developed over the millions of years before man lived in the city, pretty much in a rural community, perhaps in a farming area, where if you saw a wild animal, you could run away from it, or if you had a neighbor that you didn't like, you could run back home, and there'd be great distances, and there'd be great safety. And so it was designed such that to be virtually be used for very, very short amount of time, literally milliseconds of time. And that meant that these toxic chemicals would be in our body for a very short time and then get flushed out. And the frequency at which we used our fight or flight response was very, very low just 100 years ago, where we were pretty much a farming community. And so what happens is, one of the very first things that happens when the fight or flight response kicks in is that it turns off our immune system. It suppresses our immune system. And as a consequence of that, when the immune system is suppressed, it offers the opportunity for everything that's living in our body to come out. All the flora and fauna, as we call it, viruses that live that are typically kept under control by our immune system, for those things to then grow and become serious problems. And there are people who believe that over 99% of all illnesses and diseases are caused by the fight or flight response and the activation of the fight or flight response and the presence of the harsh chemicals that are in our body due to the long periods of activation that the fight or flight response is on in today's society. And so what we want to do is propose to the international space community to use the PHM and data from an astronaut's circadian and ultradian rhythm to identify the accelerated aging of the brain and the body in order to predict mental illness on deep space programs. And the circadian and ultradian rhythm, the reason that those are important to us is that they're created in almost the same place fight or flight response is created in the brain, and I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. And so, typically in PHM, what we need is data. And in terms of electronic equipment or mechanical equipment, we need data from inside it, performance data. And so we're not proposing to go inside of the brain and stick wires in there in order to get data, but we don't need to because we have the data coming from the circadian and ultradian rhythm that is available for us to look at. And so what we do is we use telemetry, analog telemetry, which will be derived from the measurements of the astronaut's circadian and ultradian rhythms, and I'll show you what those measurements are later on in a PHM program. And we get pre-flight data, data during launch and during spaceflight activities to develop a baseline of what normal behavior is in order for us to determine any deviances from that. And so, as expected, future deep space missions, will increase the severity and the frequency of mental illnesses occurring in astronauts by the fact that during deep space, which is an extremely hostile environment. So, if the fight or flight response is proven to be the cause of mental illness, pharmaceutical companies then can start producing medications that would be able to suppress the fight or flight response. Just as we, in autoimmune diseases, we now have chemicals available, we now have drugs available to suppress our immune system so that it will stop attacking our body. The same theory can be done with the fight or flight response. If you desensitize, if you reduce its ability to release adrenaline and cortisol, you'll stop having the problems with that it causes. And so we're hoping that just as the pharmaceutical companies develop chemicals to literally paralyze our immune system and to some point, do the same thing with our fight or flight response. Now, in PHM, these are 3 gyroscopes. This is telemetry data coming from 3 gyroscopes. I just want to show you how we predict equipment failures and measure remaining usable life on gyroscopes used on like the Hubble telescope. These are very high precision instruments. And this is 3 different gyroscopes, and this is the analog, this is simply the motor current telemetry from each one. And this is post-processing data. So this is the telemetry over a period of time, roughly about 3 months worth of data for each one. And these are 3 different gyros, and the gyro B was the one that failed. And what happened was we processed this, and before we got to it, the engineers who manufactured the gyros looked at the data and could find nothing wrong with it. So we took the same telemetry data, processed it with our predictive algorithm for gyro B, and we got this what we call now a non-repeatable transient event. We now know in PHM that transient events are associated with the end of life of equipment. We were able to predict the remaining usable life of the gyro, and in fact it did last as long as we said it was going to, and then it failed. And so this is what we do with PHM when it comes to electronic hardware or mechanical equipment, is looking at analog telemetry. And so we're going to substitute the data from the circadian and ultradian rhythms for the telemetry. So this is data of melatonin that is generated by the body, and this is over a 24-hour period. This is what for a person, this would be what a person without any mental illness over a 24-hour period, what the release of melatonin would look like over a 24-hour period. This is the melatonin that being released from a person, with a mental illness, and you can see how greatly distorted the release of melatonin is for mentally ill people as compared to that for non-mentally ill people. And so, what causes mental illness? Before you can prevent it or cure it, you got to know what causes it. And so, what I'm saying is that in an earlier presentation, in the plenary presentation, the gentleman talked about a lot of young people being abused as children, and quite often those children grow up to have mental illness. And so he just confirms what I'm going to say right now, is that people, during those times in which there's severe abuse or neglect, we develop psychological survival techniques, psychological. And so these are called survival strategies by psychologists. And what most of them, what they do is they allow us to distance our conscious mind from our subconscious mind that's sending a signal that says there's danger. And certainly if a child is being neglected or abused by their parents or by neighbors, his or her fight or flight response is sending a signal out saying, danger, fear, run away, get away. And quite often they can't. And so you've got your fight or flight response saying, run away, run away, run away, and the person can't run away. So the mind's got to do something in order to exist. Turn off. So it can't turn off the fear. It can't turn off the signals coming from the subconscious, but it can distance its conscious mind from it. And we often, in general speak, talk about, how insensitive men are to their feelings, or specific individuals. You may think of them as being insensitive or not very emotional. And and there's some reason for that. For instance, that in a hunter-gatherer society, men get to go out and kill bandies and bring them home and eat them, for dinner. Well, if we were as sensitive and as nurturing as the females were, it'd be awfully hard. It would be a lot more difficult for us to be, very good hunters. So it makes sense from a survival standpoint that men might be a little less sensitive than the more nurturing and emotional female who's responsible for bearing and raising the child, whereas the male tends to be the hunter, the gatherer, the hunter, the bringing in the food for the family to eat. And so over time we develop, if we're in a very harsh and severe situation, we develop the ability to ignore these messages from the fight or flight response. And by suppressing our feelings and emotions, we're becoming unaware of our surroundings as a survival strategy. Multiple personalities is another survival strategy I think everybody's aware of. And when a person has multiple personalities, when they're switching in and out of personalities, they're trying to escape something. They're trying to get rid of some memories somehow, and that's another form of survival mechanism I think everybody's popular with. So, after a threat that's present, as determined by the subconscious, this is not at the conscious level. The subconscious works completely independent of the conscious. At the subconscious level, for years, and the subconscious determines that the dangerous near term, the danger continuously near term. The fight or flight response, or the subconscious mind, decides that it's powerless to eliminate the threat using the conscious mind. The conscious mind isn't doing what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to be running away. It's supposed to be getting away from danger, and it's not doing that. And your subconscious mind knows that. And so the subconscious mind experiences being out of control. And so what it does is it starts creating problems for the conscious mind. We know them as mental illnesses. The very first ones that I mentioned earlier, anxiety disorder, depression. Those are the very first two indicators from the subconscious that there's something wrong in your life. And the subconscious mind is trying to tell you need to make changes. And so if people continue to ignore, now what we do today when we have anxiety disorder and we have depression, we go get the medications from a doctor and treat those symptoms and reduce their effect. But we don't make any changes in our lifestyle. Whatever threat is in our life, it remains. And so if that's the case, if you don't make any changes, quite often the next step is the subconscious mind will cause a major depression to occur. And what major depression is different symptoms and more severe. And these are the things like feeling hopeless, helpless, despair, suicidal.
And so without making the required changes that the fight or flight response wants, after a person goes through depression, which is the inability to feel your feelings and emotions, anxiety, which is your subconscious telling you that it sees danger, including your death, very serious response is anxiety disorder. because again, the subconscious, with its ability to have access to much more information than the conscious mind does, is saying that it's seeing the danger to your life. And with the addition of major depression to your symptoms, it's telling you, the subconscious mind, the fight or flight response, is telling you that it wants major changes to be made in your life. The decisions that you're making is determined is dangerous to yourself, and it wants you to make changes. If you do not do these changes that the fight or flight response wants you to do, the next step for the fight or flight response is to cause self-induced, non-recoverable brain damage. And what it does is it changes the ratio of the chemicals in the brain that creates our reality and our behavior. And when it changes this ratio, people develop two major mental illnesses. One is called bipolar disorder, and the other is called schizophrenia. And so the consequences of ignoring the messages from your fight or flight response, or your subconscious, and these are things like such as the feelings and your emotions, hunches, and anything that comes up from your subconscious that's trying to warn you that it's identified danger in your life, and it wants you to run away, or to stand and fight. And so, after ignoring your feelings and your emotions, consciously for a long time, it steps through a series of symptoms, of behaviors, trying to get your attention and wanting you to make these changes. And again, these include starting out with depression, going on to anxiety disorder, stepping it up with many more extreme and severe symptoms with major depression, and then causing either bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. And so when depression, anxiety, and major depression do not motivate the person to do the right actions according to the fight or flight response, it does cause non-recoverable brain damage. When schizophrenia, when a person has schizophrenia, this means that a person's conscious is being removed as the interface to the world. In schizophrenia, the fight or flight response, or the subconscious, is trying to interact with the physical world around it, believing that the conscious mind has betrayed it, and that it is safer for the fight or flight response to interact with the physical world around it, rather than use the conscious mind. And so the subconscious, the fight or flight response, or subconscious, is not developed to interact with the physical world around it. And oftentimes, there's chaotic behavior from the person. And that's what we consider schizophrenia. There's 4 important words that need to be defined for us to move on with regards to the symptoms of mental illness, and that's what a threat is, what stress is, what stressors are, and what triggers are, as far as the fight or flight response defines these. A threat is defined only by the person's FOFR, or subconscious. It's believed to include such events as an animal attack, or a person attempting to hit you, to hurt you, a person with a gun that pointed at you, causing you harm. Those are obvious threats, but there might be many more subtle threats that the subconscious, or the fight or flight response, is aware of, that the conscious mind is not. And it's watching and making sure that our safety is top priority. The word stress means the response of the body when the fight or flight response is activated. when the the fight or flight response recognizes that a threat as defined by the fight or flight response is present. Early indications that the fight or flight response has been activated include such minor things as hay fever and allergies, and to a wide variety of things. Today, the most common ones are peanut allergies, canker sores or mouth sores in and around in the mouth and the tongue. And that's an indication that the immune system has been suppressed, allowing the different viruses that our body normally keeps in check, allowing them to foster and grow. And not only viruses, but also if there's any diseases that our immune system is keeping under control. When the fight or flight response is activated, one of the first things that it does is it suppresses the immune system. And each time it does that, it allows these viruses to be unchecked, and also the diseases to be unchecked. And so over many, many years of living in a very dangerous or high threat lifestyle, people will often acquire serious illnesses, in their 50s. In addition, other warning signals include, chapped lips that you can't get rid of no matter what you do, any kind of treatment, heartburn. The digestive tract goes into a sympathetic response to stress. And so it actually turns on and starts operating in a high processing mode in anticipation of what's to come. And what it does is it turns on the stomach acids. And the stomach acids are then overproduced, causing conditions such as severe heartburn, hemorrhoids, rectal inflammation, Crohn's disease, any of the problems that people get in their digestive tract, either upper or lower, can be attributed as a sympathetic response to the body's behaving in the stress mode. Stressors are negative or positive events, such as family arguments or disappointments over not getting a promotion, or disappointment over not getting a raise, concerns about family finances, even anticipating a wedding or a birth, wonderful events like that. Visiting with family and friends, and you could have, hostile relationships with friends or families. That would certainly be a very stressful situation. For grandparents, playing with grandchildren that they don't see very often could be considered a stressor. Disappointment, if an unexpected ice storm, keeps family members away from a planned gathering. And without rest periods after these stressors have been reacted to by the body, individuals are more susceptible to both emotional and physical illnesses. Now, triggers include events, places, people, behaviors, items, any items that evoke a memory of a psychological behavior. Triggers are unique to the person and identified only by the person's FOFR as a past threat. The body responds much as it does to a stressor, and that's one of the reasons why these terms are often used interchangeably. And when a trigger is observed by the fight or flight response, the body often will increase its heart rate, respiratory rate will increase. The person may start perspiring at a low level. Blood pressure increases, as well as harmful psychological and emotional responses might occur. Severe physical, emotional behavior may exhibit itself, putting a person in great danger when the fight or flight response identifies a trigger. Now, the release of cortisol and adrenaline by the fight or flight response, causes premature aging or accelerated aging, whichever term you want to use, of both the body and the brain. And with cortisol and adrenaline, once they're released and go through the body, there's a whole avalanche of other chemicals that are produced as part of the fight or flight response that are effectively toxic to the body and meant to be used for extremely short duration. of time, milliseconds, maybe microseconds. But in today's lifestyle, that's often not possible to run away or stand and fight, and we must subject ourselves to a threatening or dangerous condition, long term. And this picture here on this chart with the presidents, different presidents, both before and after taking office, are major examples of how a premature aging occurs as a result of living in a high-stress lifestyle. Remember, it's the fighter, when the fight or flight response is activated, it determines the threat, and then when the threat is gone, the fight or flight response is turned off. And this decision is done solely by the fight or flight response and is way beyond the ability of the conscious mind to be aware of. Now, the long-term activation of the fight or flight response and the many toxic chemicals that the body creates after cortisol and adrenaline is released is not only responsible for mental illness, for people acquiring mental illness, it's likely responsible for 99% of all diseases. Because again, the fight or flight response controls the immune system, and when the immune system is disabled, it allows immune system related diseases to occur, and these include autoimmune system disease. With the fight or flight response being able to control the immune system, it can both suppress it as well as kick it into high gear, causing autoimmune system disease. And so that's roughly, that can be, we can attribute to the fight or flight response being responsible for about 99% of all diseases that people get. If we could turn off the fight or flight response artificially, things such as the disease, premature aging, as well as mental illness could be slowed or stopped. This next chart is about defining whether mental illness is environmentally caused or biologically caused through DNA. And we have to address this because if the mental illness is biologically related, it doesn't allow the use of our predictive algorithms in a PHS program as easily to be able to predict the onset of mental illness. And so what we say is that mental illness is 100% environmentally caused. Now, some of the characteristics of mental illness is likely responsible from DNA or biological cause. Now, what occurs is when a person lives in a dangerous or a high-stress environment, and the person starts ignoring the messages from its subconscious or its fight or flight response to its feelings and emotions, and goes through, depression, anxiety, and major depression. Whether or not the person is going to go and acquire the mental illness known as bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, that decision criteria is likely hereditary or biological. But the fact that they're going to acquire either one is environmentally caused. So what about mental illness is biologically driven? Well, the subconscious threshold for triggering when a person gets depression, major depression, anxiety disorder, bipolar disorder, or schizophrenia is likely to be biologically driven. The threshold, whether a person will skip major depression and jump right into either bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, which does happen, is likely to be biologically driven. And then the features that develop along with on the path to mental illness, such as paranoia or psychotic behavior. It's quite common for a person with bipolar disorder to have many symptoms that are also in schizophrenia. And likewise, when a person has schizophrenia, it often shares symptoms of those in bipolar disorder. And which ones of those that the person gets is likely biologically determined. This next chart is to show how similar our approach is for being able to use predictive algorithms to predict mental illness in people the same way that we are able to predict the usable life of electronic equipment. The diagram on the left is a picture of an image of a board with the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4 on, and those locations on that board would be the likely place that we would pick off engineering data to be able to measure or identify the presence of premature aging in the components on these boards. And these measurements might include things like the temperature of the board, the amount of current that's being drawn by the board, the voltage level in the equipment, the load voltage that's operating the board. And so in order to use this technology, we have to have information that's from directly inside the equipment, performance data. And this performance data, again, is picked off at different places in the board, somewhere that's referred to as analog data. Now, the image on the right shows that we using, to generate the biological data we need for predicting mental illness in astronauts for deep space missions, we want to use data from the circadian and ultradian rhythms that are created very deep in the brain, the center part of the brain or the primitive part of the brain. And in that general location is the same place in which the fight or flight response exists. And so what happens to the area of the brain that creates the fight or flight response is so close that whatever occurs to that part of the brain also occurs to the part of the brain that creates our circadian and ultradian rhythms, since they're very close to each other. And so by collecting data that's related to the circadian and ultradian rhythms, we effectively have access to performance data from inside the brain. This next diagram, this next chart is illustrates how we are able to identify the presence of accelerated aging in equipment when the electrical parts are functioning. Every electrical part on a board or in a circuit or in equipment, every electrical part or mechanical part, either way, ages in performance at its own unique rate. And the companies that make these parts promise that these some of their parts that they sell you will age prematurely and fail prematurely. They also tell you, unfortunately, they can't tell you which ones are going to do that. But this diagram shows how the different aging characteristics, which is the vertical direct down, the line that's going vertically down, as these parts are, as power is applied, electrical power is applied to these components, each one ages at a different rate. And you see these things, different components include things like transistors or capacitors, resistors, diodes, triodes, integrated circuits, amplifiers. These are all electronic parts that are used in electronic equipment for a variety of reasons. And as soon as power is applied, which begins at the upper left of this chart here, each of those begin to age at a different rate. And the one, this one happens to be in blue, is aging faster than all the rest. And as these parts all age, they interact with each other. And at some point, the part that ages the quickest will cause a transient event. And that's that first spike there, called first blip. And what will happen as a result of this transient event, it may actually trigger another part to begin aging even faster and fail. Now, the part that is aging prematurely, the fastest, is often not the part that fails first. And that's a very confusing concept. And had this understanding been known 50, 60 years ago during the beginning of the Cold War with the development of the ICBM program and the space program, the use of probability analysis to try to quantify the reliability of equipment would never have been done. And the companies that make these great big giant large electronic systems, electromechanical systems, would have been sent back and said, go find out why your equipment is failing prematurely and stop it. Well, this concept that's on this chart about how these parts age prematurely was not understood at the time. And it is really the PHM program, the Prognostics Health and Management program, that's been developed within the last 10 years and been used across many industries that applies this understanding in order to be able to predict what equipment's going to fail and calculate its remaining usable life, based on understanding the relationship of these transient events that we now tie to the end of life of the equipment. And we use this same approach as premature aging, since cortisol and adrenaline cause the body to age prematurely. We use the same approach that we use in PHM to be able to predict mental illness in the physical body. And so this chart shows an MRI image of a brain that's been exposed to long-term exposure to cortisol and adrenaline. And what that does is it kills brain cells, and brain cells do not replace themselves. And so the brain actually is much smaller for the mentally ill with serious either bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. And what we say is that mental illness, when the fight or flight response decides to cause self-induced brain damage, it causes degeneration of the central serotonin neurotransmission system, particularly the chemistry that that's involved in the presynaptic serotonin transporter ability, which is the major mechanism of neuropsychiatric symptoms that we are all aware of that we call mental illness. So, the prognostic analysis or a scientific analysis using predictive algorithms in a PHM program and the data from the person's fight or flight response via the circadian ultradian rhythm. Processing this data with the predictive algorithm will identify the presence of accelerated aging in these brains, in people's brains with mental illness. And as the person's brain continues to shrink in size due to the overexposure to cortisol and adrenaline over decades and decades, it amplifies. Remember, the frontal lobes are the part of the brain that we believe are where many of our decisions are made, and so along with the brain shrinking, the frontal lobes are also made smaller, and with that comes likely, it impacts the accuracy or the correctness of the decisions that people make with mental illness, because again, the frontal lobes are much smaller than a person who doesn't have mental illness. And so predictive algorithms, the way we describe how they function is that they demodulate the behavior in the data from the circadian and ultradian rhythm. This is time-based data, and we demodulate in amplitude, frequency, phase, and time, and to identify the presence of either premature aging or accelerated aging in completely normal appearing data from fully functional elements. This next chart illustrates the different numbers of the different predictive algorithms that we use to do a variety of things when we're processing data. And they were developed to be used under the most worst-case data collection environment, where you might not have enough data in which to work with, or you may have too much data, just overwhelming amounts of information to work with, and you have to sort through and filter out the excess data and still hold on to the data that's of importance. And it's also provides the ability to identify and remove any data that's corrupted due to any possible reason, such as electronic noise, RF noise, that causes the data that would be sent back from the astronauts from space, which is often occurs. And so our algorithms are able to identify and remove all of those things that degrade the accuracy and quality of the data, so that what we use is 100% correct, increasing the accuracy of our results. And so this next chart are examples of the measurements needed from an astronaut's circadian and ultradian rhythms to be able to predict mental illness. And what we would want to do is have this data collected. These are measurements such as systolic and diastolic blood pressure, heart rate, body temperatures, melatonin levels, cortisol levels, the amount of food that a person wants to eat versus we'd also want to know how much they're supposed to be eating for the activity levels that they have, how much liquid intake that they want to have, how much liquid intake that they actually have, and how much liquid intake was it predicted that they were supposed to need, and then the waste that they get rid of, both liquid and solid waste. We want to track everything that we can of this type of data about the astronaut, from before their training starts to go on to a deep space mission, all the way into their training period, their preparation for launch, during the launch, once they reach space, and then once they're on their journey to deep space. We would want to collect this data and process it using our predictive algorithms, always searching for the presence of premature aging. And these are some examples of what short-term behavior looks like for body temperature data on the left, and then the normal short-term systolic blood pressure in the center chart, and then on the right chart is normal short-term heart rate. Now, each one of these graphs are only for a 24-hour period. In our use for a deep space mission, we would want this data available for literally years, and collect the data and process it and have it available from the very start of the person's time and training for the deep space mission till all the way through till the deep space mission is concluded several years later. This next chart is an example that explains how conceptually why a person acquires mental illness from an unbalanced life. Often an unbalanced life that causes mental illness is one in which is highly dangerous and is highly stressful. And people that live in highly dangerous lifestyles in which their life is in danger continuously have a lifestyle that can be fitted to a diagram like that's on this chart, known as the unbalanced life. And this is created by our conscious mind, unconsciously. And so most people they're completely unaware that they live an unbalanced lifestyle. They're normal. And this then leads to a mental illness later in life if they live this unbalanced lifestyle for quite a while. The subconscious, the fight or flight response, allows the conscious great latitude in creating its life, only to punish it later in its older years when as the body ages in the 50s and 60s, and major changes occur with the immune system and how the body functions. And so to gain balance from this unbalanced lifestyle, it requires learning techniques often for relationship building and exercise, stretching, and relaxation to help remove the stressors and to counter the stressors, the damage that's being done to the body, trying to turn off the fight or flight response. Not the immune system, but the fight or flight response is the goal. And so even when men go through what's called male menopause, which is caused by a person often making life-altering decisions desired by others, and they realize that they've actually been living their life for other people rather than for themselves. Very, very stressful condition, very, very imbalanced lifestyle, often resulting in great psychological trauma later on, where they need lots of either psychotropic drugs or other forms of treatment. Stopping and recovering from mental illness in a deep space mission would be done by switching to a balanced lifestyle. You can see the image on the right where it appears to be a wheel, and the wheel like a pie shape, and each one of those slices of the pie are of equal size. And you can see that in a balanced lifestyle, there's a large portion of a person's life is related to their family and friends, the social life. You can see there's mental activity, creativity, physical exercise, A lot of time is needed to be connected to their spiritual life. Time has to be set aside for them to be able to handle their financial responsibility as well as work. And you can see there that each one of those pieces is fairly the same size. And if this pie-shaped image was spinning on a pole, through the center there of that diagram, if any one of those pieces were to grow in size, they work. They're devoting a tremendous amount of time to work. It would cause the wheel to wobble. So in order to get back to a balanced lifestyle, you'd have to add energy and time into the other segments of their life in order to balance out that stress, additional stress from work, so that the wheel would rotate smoothly again. So learning to live a balanced lifestyle once you've acquired mental illness will reduce the need to take psychotropic medications for a lifetime. And by using the manned space program to prove that the recovery from mental illness exists, pharmaceutical companies may be induced to develop drugs to do a couple of things. One is to reverse the damage, the self-induced damage done to the brain, and acquiring serious mental illnesses of bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, that will allow the decrease in the treatment of the symptoms, as well as creating drugs that will help turn off the fight or flight response artificially. And by being able to disable the fight or flight response, you then short circuit the worsening of a person's mental illness, as well as the other diseases that people may acquire over time. And so, in summary of those things that I've mentioned here, mental illness can be predicted and prevented using our predictive algorithms and data from the astronauts' circadian and ultradian rhythms. Mental illness has been reported on manned space missions, both low Earth orbit, and more severe mental illnesses are likely to occur during future deep space missions. And that's why this research was done, to show that there is a solution to the mental illnesses that may likely to occur on future deep space missions. And the risk of acquiring mental illness is much higher for astronauts due to the dangerous environment that exists during the training for launch, during launch rehearsals, launch readiness, actual launch, and then working and living in space once they get there. And this is due to the astronauts knowing that already 14 astronauts have perished due to human error in the space program. And so when astronauts get up into space, they lose about 10% of their body mass, including brain matter, every 6 months. And so for every 6 months that a person's body is in space and is exposed to microgravity, some brain matter, the brain does atrophy, and that then amplifies or speeds up the onset of any mental illness. So using predictive algorithms from the Prognostics and Health Management Program and data or measurements from the astronauts' circadian and ultradian rhythms, we're completing a prognostic analysis by ground personnel. We'll be able to predict, and once you can predict someone's going to be getting a mental illness, you can change their environment, putting them in a far less dangerous environment that will then stop the mental illness from getting worse, preventing it. And then, what if the person, if an astronaut on a deep space mission was to acquire a mental illness, this research identified the process necessary of learning, changing their unbalanced